Everyone. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us for the virtual launch of Bitterhall. We've just been listening to some beautiful fiddle music composed specifically for Bitterhall by Roseanne Watt. I was so arrested by the imagery as well. It was just so gorgeous. Before we go on, I want to let all of you know that this event will be recorded. So if anyone misses any of it, if you have to cut out directly at 8 p.m. And if we run a little bit over, you'll be able to watch it on YouTube later. So I'm your host, Eris Young. I'm the writer in residence at Lighthouse Bookshop, of which I hope you are all aware. But if not, you'd better go check them out. Tonight, I'm speaking to Helen McClory about her new book, Bitterhall. Helen is the author of two short story collections, Mayhem and Death and On the Edges of Vision, which won a Saltire First Book of the Year award, as well as a novel, Flesh of the Peach. The Goldblum Variations, a collection of experimental microfictions, was published by 404 Inc. and reprinted by Penguin. Helen's short stories have been listed for distinction in Best of British Fantasy and Best of British and Irish Flash Fictions. Helen is also a part-time lecturer at the University of Glasgow and a co-founder of the Right Toscana Retreat, which I really want to go on. So Bitterhall is Helen's newest novel. I don't want to give too much away because we're about to talk about it. I'll just say for now that it focuses on three principal characters, Daniel, Orla, and Tom, and it relates a series of events that ripple outwards from the discovery of a diary written by a very mysterious 19th century gentleman. This is such a singular book. It is got such an interesting structure and so many themes that are all tangled up with each other. So I'm very excited to launch it. And how about we start with a reading. Helen, I think you had a couple of passages you were interested in reading?
Yes, so I'm going to read from towards the beginning of the book with Daniel when he meets one of the other central narrators. Herself. Orla was just about the strangest person I had met apart from myself. She came the night of the housewarming. She was late, and the men of the house were tipsy, and rapidly it seemed that she was in some parallel universe way a kind of version of myself, though as far as she let on, without the hampering awfulness that at all times I have to fight back from my brain. Mind, how would I know such things? Battlefields are sometimes as smooth as a spring meadow to look at, the terror subcutaneous, twisting roots and expanding sinkholes at the biological level, maybe atomical. She resembled me physically as well, to my eye, and that was encouraging. She was exactly my height and had grey eyes, to my brown, of the same long shape and heavy lashes, and brown hair a shade lighter than mine, thick and shiny and unruly, the hair that as a child your mother frets over with the brush and dabs of spit. Stupidly, dimly encouraging it seemed. Daniel, I told myself, as I handed her a beer from the fridge, exchanging it for the wine she had brought. So, said Orla, thanks. I got it at lunch, so it needs to cool down. Irish. I couldn't tell where from. I shied away from looking at her, as I always did, getting overwhelmed with the contract of shared human gaze. Taking the time instead to scope out the fruit situation. Still 5 bananas in a bowl on the table. Away elsewhere in the house, the macho bonding hour was long in its cups. It seemed like the godlike Tom liked to laugh about bad reality TV as much as the others in the living room, and I didn't need to be in that or any other conversation a crowd like that might have. Orla stood there in the kitchen in her blood-red coat, alert, waiting for something. At last, I tried to zero in on her face, thinking it was about time I said something, looked at her. Something welcoming. But all I could manage, the eyes too clever, too much, a crackly, living stare, was to attempt a deeper picture of this enviable stranger from her atmospherics. Then she seemed to me, and also like an seemed like me and also like an open vista of the sea with a high wind blowing, like a glimpse of the shore below cliffs and the white water and somewhere seagulls crying, eyes grey but flashing. There was a depth, is what I'm saying. This impression is, of course, coloured by all that came after it. But that night, Orla's blue scarf covering all of her neck and that dark red coat, something I would wear if I was her, because it looked excellent, made her pale face shine, and that red lipstick contrasted well with all. I was somewhat awed by the moment, you can tell. Standing together, we both looked good, like conspirator siblings full of health. All that lent strength by her clever way of dressing. I made a note to get myself some oxblood cardigan at some point in the future. Orla cracked the beer, made a face drinking. Nice coat, I said. Her eyes sought me out again, and I looked down and away, and again like always. You're wondering the why, aren't you? Said Orla. I hate beer. I always hate it, and I hate it. Does the job, but... Not really, I said, opening a bottle of bitter lemon, fingering the bottles on the counter for the right one. Basic gin. Oh, look at you, like you know what I was going to say, said Orla. No, why what from you? And thanks, it's from a charity shop. We sat down at the kitchen table, her trying not to break eye contact, but me, the expert at breaking it, slippery, the kind of person a security guard in a shop tries to keep in view, but who always vanishes behind the stacks. I began to wish, despite myself, that I could stop being that way. It was because of her. She was offering me something, I thought. Was it more her almost tangible mood I found so distinctive, rather than what she had actually said? From the living room, the throb of music. Bader had a few friends from way back, and a few friends from his office. I'd met them and felt the need to be evasive. And Tom had himself, and that was enough. His laughter came often. A pang struck me, a deep ringing sound in my chest. Don't tease, I said, looking at her at last. I know what you meant with your why. Oh, I? Tom, right? You're asking me if I wonder why you're with Tom. Instantly like that, you've asked me a question to be the judge of you and him. But you phrase it or believe it. Just in this instant, you think I'd come up in my mind. First, for the question, dilemma of why you two are together, which is quite presumptuous of you, or that I'd be thinking it was a preoccupation of yours. Just that, I answered. Orla looked at my drink. Is it good, bitter lemon? I've never had it. Try some. I don't have a cold. Orla raised the glass up to her lips. She would get red on the glass. She drank daintily, the bands on her throat moving, shadow and limb. I turned away. Ah, how'd you like it? I said, thinking, already? Orla wrinkled her nose. It's bitter. It is bitter, I said, looking at my finger swirling a circle on the table, smiling. I like it. Pour me some. I handed her a fresh glass. I feel like I know you, said Orla. Isn't it weird? Do you?
Thank you. That was great. It's been a while since I've read that first chapter. It was nice to hear it again. So do you want to, shall I ask you some questions first? And let's get started. Right, so one of the first things I noticed about the book, and you've just read a whole chapter essentially, is the way it's contained into these very short, three larger parts and then short named chapters rather than numbered chapters. They're more like scenes, each one. Can you talk about why you chose to structure the book this way?
In small chapters, I think there's something that I'm always drawn to, this mechanism of Flash, this sort of tiny machine. I feel like it has more grace to it, more elegance than big chapters that kind of carry a whole scene through. And the nature of how I write is such that I feel that the reader also needs to take breaks and just kind of just process, because it is quite thick, in a good way, I hope, as you read it. There's something, more, I want to say it's like a signature style. Is that too arrogant of me to say?
Fine. Yeah, go ahead.
It's a signature style of short chapters. Although at some point I'll probably break that and write something with no chapters at all. Yeah, I find specifically for a long individual voice, it really does help, and with my own language too, to just break it up like that.
I did find that while I was reading it, I would sort of, because I've been reading quite light stuff, you know, lockdown reading, and then I read this, and I found myself going back and rereading passages to unpick more meaning out of them, which was very satisfying. So one of my favorite things about the book was how close we get to the different point of view characters, and how different their narrative voices are from each other. Obviously one of them is Daniel, but we do get other perspectives as well. Can you tell us about your process for getting into a POV character's head, especially with such introspective and self-aware characters, and how do you separate their voices from each other, like keeping them distinct from each other?
That's the biggest challenge of the book, is to just, you should be able to pick it up at any point, like flick through it and go, okay, within a little while, figure out who is speaking. And a lot of that is to do with sentence length and structure. So Daniel kind of has these slightly longer sentences. The introspection is really there on the surface. He's always talking about himself or Tom, and like how he relates to other people and how they relate to him. He's very concerned with that. Yeah, he's always going off into kind of whimsical thoughts about things, I think, or yearning. I should say yearning is probably more accurate. Orla, I wanted to kind of look at a sort of semi-academic style because she is a PhD student. She's studying codicology, the study of the history of the book as an object. So I wanted her to make references that are more, you know, high culture, and also to be quite sharp and distinctive. She's got opinions. She's trying to present her argument in a way. And then with Tom, not to give too much away about Tom, but he requires shorter sentences, sentence fragments to kind of show this fragmenting of self that's going on with him. Little echoes of things throughout come back with him because he's the final narrator. And I hope that, yeah, that's coming across in that. So the character comes, I hope, from the very level of the language to try and bring it out at that point.
It definitely comes across. Yeah, and getting to know each different perspective is really, really exciting. So were there one or the other points of view that presented challenges? Was there one or the other that you connected with more or less?
Yeah, I think the initial narrator, Daniel, is the one I connect with the most because he's the one I started with. And initially, I think I was going to try and write the whole book from his perspective, but rapidly realized you need more than one perspective to look at this story, which is about fragmenting selves and connection. And he is probably the most like me, I think. That's weird to say. I mean, he's a fictional creation that I made, so they're all like me, you know. Tom was perhaps the most difficult, because I was aware of trying to balance what's going on with him with a sensitivity to perspectives on mental health and things like that. And also to write from what is quite a macho point of view. He goes to the gym a lot. He likes his muscles. He works in advertising, which I've never done. So he's like very, very far away from who I am as a person. So it was probably him. And then Orla's somewhere in the middle because I'm not as, I think, academically minded. I probably wouldn't start a discussion / argument in my own personal journal / log, which she's doing. But at the same time, I still understand that the academic world and that, you know, kind of perspective that she has.
So another really unique structural element, and I don't know if I had seen this before, because I've heard some multi-POV, some writing advice blogs or whatever say like, oh, you can't tell the same events through multiple perspectives. But that's kind of what the whole book does, is it shows us the plot events recounted by more than one character. So we see the events through multiple different eyes, and there are places where one person's recall was subtly different or totally different from another character's recollection of events, or at least the way they put the events down on the page. What do these like discrepancies, like, you know, between two different tellings allow you to do as an author?
Well, I think they tie into the themes of the book, which are about I don't know if you can hear that eerie music in the background. Probably not. But there's an ice cream van going by, playing some spooky music, which is kind of perfect. So yes, what was I saying? Yes, it's about the themes of the book. And I lost my train of thought. Can you repeat the question, please?
Oh, yeah, it's okay. It's very distracting, ice cream. What do the discrepancies between different people's recollections of events allow you to do?
Well, yes, it's to sort of show subjectivity and have this kind of strange sense of overlap, but not quite. So you get a kind of combining when things are different that acts as a kind of prism for the light to kind of pass through, so that you have this combined telling that is, if you had the individual ones on their own, it wouldn't be the same and it wouldn't build up in the same way. And it's also really fun to do, just as an author, to go, okay, how does this character see themselves and see what is happening in that scene as compared to this other one? How do they feel that they're representing themselves? It's like, you know, the To a Louse poem, the Rabbie Burns poem about having a louse in the back of your bonnet, and then you think you look great, but the person behind you can see that you have this beastie in there. So there's characters who think, oh, I'm doing so well in this scene, like he or she thinks I'm amazing, or conversely, they can be like, oh, I look like an idiot to this person, they think I'm terrible. Whereas later you get the perspective that they didn't think that at all. Perhaps they admired them or even just didn't notice because they were doing their own thing. And I think that's a lot about, it says a lot about human relationships, that's how it often is. We sort of center ourselves as the main character.
Yeah, it's not really, because like, yeah, like each person is the protagonist of their own story. So so a big thing that the book engages with, actually I'm going to swap two questions around, because you mentioned this sort of imitative aspect of like relating to other people. So there's this idea of imitation that crops up a few times, an idea of like performing personhood, and especially performing masculinity, that comes up for a number of characters. Can you and it's usually at the expense of real communication. Like we have these instances where two characters are like performing, talking to each other, but nothing is really being shared between them. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, so I think performance is interesting because the characters of a book are all performances. They are this thing that's happening in the mind of the author when they're writing, and then the reader is staging it themselves. And so I'm very interested in that artificiality in general. And then specifically, yes, so this idea of masculinity is so fascinating. I did a module at university in ancient Greek masculinity at a tender age of like 18, 19. And it just fascinated me ever since. Like a culture will have an idea of what it is to be a man. And then it can just vary so starkly. But when you're in it, it seems like that's the one standard of, you know, not so much now, but that's it, you know, this idea. And I feel like Tom in particular has bound himself to the one idea of being a man, probably inherited from he grew up with his grandmother, so he's kind of got this slightly older idea of what it means to be manly and how to present yourself, and it does involve a little bit of remove from your own feelings, and so that he's constantly trying to perform this and sort of failing and crumbling, where Daniel is not in the same way performing his masculinity. It's different, it's a bit more gentle, a little bit more thoughtful, but perhaps at the same time has its own traps and problems, because he and Tom both become enamored of this other masculine character, this James Lennox Love, who is this kind of dashing gentleman. The idea of masculinity from the 19th century that we have, the early 19th century that we have, and that is a performance in itself, but I'm not going to go too much into that.
Yeah, it's interesting how Tom's performance of masculinity is like he's much more invested in it, it seemed to me, than Daniel, or at least it was a more pertinent aspect of his character, and it makes him quite vulnerable a lot of times.
Absolutely, he's very vulnerable, I think, throughout, and it was quite stressful to write because he's always on the edge of things, and he's trying so hard not to be.
I found myself going, oh Tom, so there is a larger idea, I think, we have, like, imitating, being a person, but there's a whole concept of like copying and imitating, and like the relationship between a copy and an original, or how an object or person can appear one way on the surface, but actually be something else inside. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so central to the idea of the book is the idea of the book. It's kind of strange, but so Orla is studying codicology, as I've said, kind of history of the book as an object, and her reference form is books that are singular, so books that are really old, from 1,000 years old, 900 years old, that have been preserved and brought to us, and she's fascinated by the journey that they have gone on through their lives and how they've accrued meaning, or changed hands, or been slightly damaged or deliberately damaged. And there's this idea that I started to explore of the fact that books, as we have them, are all copies of one another. They're just, I mean, not the content wise, I don't mean that, but just like, this looks exactly like that one. And they are not unique, but at the same time, the contents carry meaning for different people and have that, as I've said, like the reader is performing it in their own way. And that fascinated me. And then there's this other thing of technology and how that will change our relationship with objects and books as we go on through the years. We're just going to see new ways of seeing things, like the idea that you can copy something and keep it yourself. So you could get like the Book of Kells, and if you had enough money, you could have an almost identical copy of it, just to peruse for yourself. We're not there yet, but what would that do to the meaning of these objects? At the moment, we have the replication of the internet, so we can see images on our screens, and you can look at the Mona Lisa every day. You could flip the colors of the Mona Lisa if you wanted, you can make it yours, but it's there, it's replicated. I think John Berger actually goes into this a little bit on the idea of like what that does to your relationship with art. And
yeah,
for me, it's fascinating, and how we kind of try to make things unique, but also to celebrate their ubiquity in a way. Like, there's something interesting about the fact that Starry Night is everywhere. Like, you can get a postcard of it, you can have it in your home, and it doesn't change, but it changes a little bit for you. It's really interesting. And I'm obviously still processing ideas of how this works. In the book, there is this object that Tom brings back from work, which is a marketing toy, I guess, A kind of, what did he call it? Like a horse mermaid. It's basically a kelpie, but
a neon colored Eeyore with a pervert's gaze.
yes, that's how I describe it. Like a just hideous toy that is meant to sell alcohol, which is very immoral, but also has a Wi-Fi enabled thing inside it, so it can record everything you say and feed that back and get data on you, because that's where we all live pretty much almost now. And I wanted to look at, like, how can you take a malevolent object or a hideous object and copy it and have an almost identical thing, but have that change its meaning? And I thought that was kind of interesting. And I'm excited to see in the future what technology brings us and how we're going to take hideous things and think more of them.
I think that's an excellent segue into, I mean, I wrote the questions, so obviously it's an excellent segue into the speculative elements in the book. So there's, we have a science fictional element here, you know, possibly attainable in the next few decades or so, but it is a science fictional element of a very advanced 3D printer. And then on the other hand, we have this subtle but increasingly apparent element of haunting and or possession. Can you talk a little bit about the way that these elements play into the story and interact with each other?
Yes, so I think I have this big issue with realism, and this comes out every time I try and write. I think, what's real? Why is, you know, a kitchen sink drama more real than a ghost story or the science fiction story? Oh, where was it? I saw it. There was a good take on Twitter that said historical fiction and science fiction are both the same thing from different ends. Is imagining the past versus imagining the future. And neither of them are real in any way. And I thought that was so true, even though it was said as a joke. I think
I've always thought historical fiction is speculative fiction. So yeah, I agree.
It's totally true. I think it's totally true. You can't have anything that's quote unquote real, if that's the haziest definition. You can't define real, especially when it's fiction. So I'm always going to pull on these things because the imagination of human beings is not realist. And in this book in particular, the imaginations of the characters so central and their outlooks on life very different, and often, you know, drawn towards the kind of ghost story, the strange, the eerie, or towards a kind of glimpse of the future and a breakdown, and how stresses of the current era that we're in kind of bleed into who they are. That you couldn't have just pure realist stuff and have it feel like it's something that it was coming from them. It would just seem too bland. You'd be missing that aspect. I think it has to have the speculative, it has to have the ghost story, you know, I think, to function.
Yeah, I think it certainly allowed for much more thematic exploration at the very least, like from a narrative level. But I always feel like, screw realism. I'm a fantasy writer, so. I'm interested in the 3D printer as a physical thing, as well as a plot device. What was your process of like designing it? I guess, you know, hypothetically designing this printer, both what it can do and what its limitations are.
So the germ of the idea. Oh,
ooh!
I had my phone on silent. I have no idea how it did that. That's spooky.
It's spooky. It's haunted.
Yes, I didn't have it on silent. It's usually a robo voice that likes to call me and tell me scary things in my ear about how I've had a car crash and I can claim money back. Anyway, the future is terrible. So the germ of the idea for the computer came from this exhibit of code ecology at Glasgow University, in the library there. And they were exploring ways that people would interact with books in the future. And one of them was they were going to make this big kind of mold of a book that was so tactilely specific that you could kind of touch this mold and it would feel like the pages of a specific ancient book. And they would also have e-ink, which is this new stuff where it can take an electrical current so that you can link it. So you take this kind of like stylus and touch the spaces on this theoretical mold, and it would like go to a computer screen and pop up a little bit of information. So it would maybe have use in a library or a museum, where if you wanted to learn more about an illustration or a quote that you're looking at this thing, interacting with this thing, and it would come up with more. And I thought this is a really interesting germ of an idea. How would you make this tactile thing? And how would you incorporate these odd e-ink, this liquid? And from there, I started to think of 3D printers and how they're basically just like nozzles that spew out plastic into the shape of things. And it needs more nuance, and it will have more nuance in the future, where you can interact with it, and might be some fusion of these different elements. And then I started thinking about 70s sci-fi, 60s sci-fi, where the computer is the entire room, because I just love that aesthetic with big buttons. And I thought about the process of copying something so rare that there's only one of it in the world, and you have to be incredibly careful. So I designed the entire space where the 3D printer is done with that in mind, like soundproofing, very like padded floors. Everything is very like designed for the delicate and the fragile, and also extremely valuable. So you have like locks on the door that you have to use a number to get in, and even the materials that would be used, because they'd be so specifically researched for a specific thing. Like in my mind, it's not a thing that would normally make copy after copy after copy, or instantly loads of different objects. You would specifically have to go and say, I want to copy this vase. And then it would take months to just do the research on how to copy it, and then to make the materials, and then to do it. And the materials to do it would be very specific and stored away, and only like a very trusted person could go and get them. So basically in my mind, it was like a lot of paperwork, very linked to an academic setting, not possible for the individual at home at that point to make it. So that I had all these elements in mind, and I hopefully put it together in a way that is believable, even though it's not currently there with us. We cannot currently make a Ming vase or the Book of Kells.
Yeah, I did find it was a space that I could easily imagine, like having done my master's and gone down into the George Square like basement flats with all the like random experiment equipment and things down there. I could easily imagine the printer lab being put down there. So something that I didn't expect to see, but was pleased to see in Bitterhall was this sort of subtle thread of anxiety throughout the book around climate collapse, like landfills, plastic in the ocean. Why was it important to include, to touch on these topics?
I think because it's on my mind all the time, constantly now, is just the idea that we are living in this waste of plastic, this world that is full of replications that are just useless, one-use forks and huge bits of fishing equipment that just clogging the ocean. And I wanted to kind of exercise that a little bit in the writing. But I also thought that characters are going to think the same things I am about, you know, this disaster that we're living through. I couldn't quite imagine a world where we had moved on from that, and that's quite sad. But I think it even contributes to the greater anxiety that, for example, Tom has about existence in the world. He knows that he is a polluter, and that there's nothing sacred in his life in a way. It's kind of this horrible weight to have that you're living in the Anthropocene, this kind of idea that everything is changing because of us. The climate's going to be forever changed and all the animals are going to die. It's not, again, I don't think we're there yet, but it is a kind of depressing note that I can't escape from, I can't ignore, especially when the theme of the book is this kind of replication, imitation, endlessness of objects. Objects outlive us forever, you know, or for hundreds of years. Even the most banal object will exist way longer than we will. And that's kind of strange to live with, I think. Super depressing answer, sorry.
Well, and I mean, I think it is the kind of thing, I mean, this is a sort of near future science fictional story in a lot of ways. And I think to have characters who are like millennials like us, and like the idea that they wouldn't be thinking about these things constantly isn't really believable. So
I think so. I think you can't get away. If you are a millennial, this is your entire life has been in the shade of it.
Yeah, it's just a fact.
Yeah.
So there's a sort of pulling back, and I mean, maybe this is a wishy-washy question, but there's a very interesting sense throughout the book of something emerging. I think you used the word uri at one point, a sense of something coming gradually closer to both the main characters and to the reader. And there's really good tension that makes the book like very like, can you talk about how you went about creating this sense of emergence and tension?
So part of it comes from this setting at the time of year it's set in. It's autumnal, and uri is a word that can also mean kind of damp and dismal, like, you know, autumn, late autumn in Scotland. And I had that feeling when the lights start getting dark and it starts getting cold, and there's a tension in that it's sometimes you have beautiful days, but you know you're going to get months of darkness and cold and wet, and that just starts to influence how you behave. And I just wanted to have this sense of things progressing in that very basic way. And then with the narrative itself, without trying to give too much away, I wanted this idea that there's a catalyst, and then events slowly unfold over these days of the autumn until they reach a point, and that point is a physical space at the very end of things. I don't want to give too much away. So yes, sort of setting as well as the season. So it's set in a northern city, which is Edinburgh. We're just going to come right out and say that. It's quite pretty clear if you look at it. And that's a very Gothic setting, a very uri place in the best of times. I think today it was misty, or last night it was very misty, where I'm at, on the outskirts.
Ironically sunny during this event.
Yeah. Oh well, you can't draw the weather to you unless you have some kind of magical flute that does it. And so that naturally comes into it as well, the sense of tension that's in the city of Edinburgh. There's a reason there's so much crime fiction set here. I think it's just kind of an unsettling uri kind of a place, and I hope that all adds up to pushing the narrative forward and drawing the reader in.
Yeah, there's like a growing sense of like decay and collapse that it's very compelling. So it is, we've got about 15 minutes left, which is plenty of time, but I just wanted to flag to the audience, if you want to put any questions that I've not asked into the Q&A little dealie at the bottom, we can have a look at them. Got a couple more that I've written up.
Do we have time for a quick reading, and then we can see?
Yeah, we have plenty of time actually. Yeah.
So people can think instead of listening.
Have a think, everybody.
Okay. This is from Orla's narration. Skin. A book of religious poems is made. It begins with skin. In the meadow 1,000 years ago, a herd of 9 red yearlings are drawn away from their mothers by a man in a smock, calling, bearing an armful of sweet hay. Tails beat the air as they trot. It's raining lightly on another island. The rain will be on this one soon. The drover lures his 9 red cows over the meadows to a low stone-ringed field. His youngest, a girl, slaps their flanks, dusty with pollen. Their soft red fur quivers. Through the gate, one by one, towards the cutting stone. His eldest boy looks up, just a moment, from sharpening the knife on a long black strop. The clouds come in. His sister wipes her wet hands on her own sides and looks about for how to begin. The vellum is cured at the hands of skilled workers on the sacred island from the raw calf skin, which is of high quality and soft. The book is one made to order, Old English text copied from Old English text, illustrations chosen by the buyer and inserted as miniatures, ornate with pleasing details of flowers or fruits common to this area of the world. It takes a team of scribes and illustrators working together for months to make it as perfect as they are, in their effort, able to. One side of the vellum was the outer-facing part, where the hairs grew on the body of the calf. The other side faced inwards against the flesh of an animal that once fed and walked, lived. It is high quality. Nevertheless, there are imperfections, raised veins, a stippledness on a few parts. They write on this skin, dead skin, the scribes and illustrators. The edges of their hands rest on it, skin against skin. The points of their tools mark where the borders within which the writing or pictures must lie. They tire, they rub their faces and touch this dead skin, which doesn't feel them back. The penmanship is beautiful, showing only small variations between the characters of the men who wrote it, their moods for the day, the light they had to see by, the temperature that cramped a finger or caused a momentary distraction in the line. Behind the flyleaf are hidden little ink marks made by one writer or another, testing out a new quill, writing their initials or a corded flower on a stem. Such small things to last so long in secret. The flyleaf is sealed away against the leather binding until such time as the method of sealing fails. The book is finished and the buyer takes it home. The buyer's family cherish it, then, over generations, slowly forget it. A candle burning too closely to a library shelf smokes a line across the cover. Its spine crackles like a fire when opened. Fashions change. The buyer's entire family are killed on the wrong side of a war. There are innumerable wars. It is a miracle it has stayed so long in the one family until now. The book goes to a soldier's house. The soldier's son practices his letters under the image of the Virgin, piety towards her belonging to the old religion. He draws a horse shitting and a portrait of himself as a soldier. His brother draws a boat. The soldier's grandson, hard up, sells the book. The buyer sells it on. The buyer sells it on. The buyer dies and his estate sells it on. The book is lost, recovered, sold on. No one has opened the book to read its poems with the devotional intention for which it was made in 500 years, though by now the book is much older than that. The book does not remember how old it is, and no one is asking it to tell. A small private museum holds the book in a box in its storage area until a university buys the book and takes it to where other books are, to cherish what the book is, what great vessel it has become. It begins to be read in a new way. New hands gently touch its skin, its dead skin, trying to understand the marks left on it by the hands that made them, now lying much reduced in vanished graves, in graveyards full of their narrow like, once living, cautious, skilled, near what once were tall, steady collections of buildings, hubs where beautiful books were written for export or to be stored in libraries, places where page lay open next to page on huge tables in the light, text to text, illustration to illustration, scribe to scribe, on islands tiny, now out of the way places of half-fallen stones and blackberry vines. The graves of the calves that made the pages that make up this book are not known, and neither are those of the drover and his family, nor the people who made the vellum that made the pages, nor the grasses that the calves ate, nor the flowers.
I love that passage. That line about they touch the dead skin that doesn't feel them back is like.
It actually came from an interview that I had with Joanna Green, who's a codecologist at Glasgow University. I don't know if she's watching this or will, but she just inspired me so much. She talked a lot about how when you touch an ancient book, you are touching skin, and it can't feel you, but you can feel this ancient skin, and it just lodged in my mind.
Right. So we've got quite a few questions. Do you want to take a look at the ones we've got so far and see if there's any that that interest you more or less than the others?
I like this one. If you could replicate anything you wanted with a 3D printer, what would it be? And that's from Rebecca Ortuska. Sorry if I'd mispronounced that. Yes. What would you replicate with a 3D printer? If you could do anything, like with the technology that's in the book. Oh, that's so tough. What would I want to have? And the thing I come down to is I'd want to see things being made with a 3D printer, but I wouldn't want to own it because things are so precious that I would want them to be shared. I just want to be present for that, I think. So I want to see some kind of old hoard of coins being replicated so that people could touch them in a museum, but also I could get to see the coins themselves, and the kind of glinting, this ancient thing interacting with this impossibly modern thing.
And see the machine adding like the layer of dirt and tarnish onto them.
Yes, and just kind of seeing how does it become this thing? In what ways does it differ? Just that. I don't ask for much.
That's not much. Let's see. Well, there's one that I was going to ask, which is, can you talk about like the way of your way of developing writing from flash fiction up to novel? Like, what are the differences in process? Is it a difference in kind or just in scale? Or
yeah, there is this kind of sense of scale. Like a novel is this huge creaking ship, and you just have to get on it and wait for it to reach the furthest shore. And you don't know if you will, if you'll sink or if you'll get there, what storms will come up. And it's slow, but it's kind of rewarding and tactile. And then this is the process, hopefully not reading it. I don't know, maybe that's also good. But then with flash fiction, the transportation is immediate. You kind of fly into the next place. And there's something very freeing about that, but it's also less earned sometimes, perhaps. And I love flash fiction, I love writing it. And I wanted to have that galleon that I built from scratch. But also it's so hard. All you have is like a little hammer and nails and some wood, and then getting on it and seeing what if it's going to float. You know, it is a challenge. And as I've said before, it kind of comes, I tried to subvert it a little bit was to have those short flash chapters, those tiny machines, little gears, getting me forward and getting the book forward in a way that's satisfying and immediately transportive, as well as still going to somewhere, if that makes sense.
So that was a question from Ariel Cachola. So we've answered that. So there's one from Alexa in the chat that I've just received. Let's see, Helen, you are someone, evidently someone who's interested in blending and breaking genres. The Gothic is so often thought of as being something of the past, and yet you rightly reveal it as being remarkably contemporary. Was this difficult for you? Did you have the burden of the Gothic genre or any of the genres that you drew from?
Interestingly, I didn't really think about the Gothic as a genre when I was writing it. It just came out that way.
Definitely came out.
It came out dark. I think that's just the materials I was using in the place that I was using them and the person that I am. That the Gothic can be a part of the outlook. Oh, maybe it seems too big a phrase, the Gothic. Just imagine this German Gothic font filling it.
A cathedral.
Cathedral font, yes. This idea that you have genre and that you're working to it, comes back to that idea I was discussing earlier. Like, it's just a part of who you are. It's just a part of human nature, is to see the uncanny in things and to have these tropes. I mean, having old castles and ghosts and things like that makes absolute sense if you live in Scotland. There are tripping over castles here, and tripping over ghosts. They're everywhere. Look at my shadow. This is kind of ghostly now.
Yeah, and a haunted phone.
So yeah, I think that's just it. It just comes from the materials. It's just an organic process. Maybe if I set a book in a tropical island with happy people who are just chilling out, it would not be Gothic, but then probably it would.
Tropical Gothic.
Gothic, yeah. You get Gothic everywhere, I guess. Gothic is a state of mind.
Let's see. More questions that tickle your fancy? Shall I just pick one from the, let's see. There's some really good questions.
Yeah, just pick one. So. Fire one away.
So let's see. Do you want to talk a little bit more about your use of Scottish words in your work in general?
Okay, things the editor flags up and goes, did you mean this something else? So I actually had that with Uri. I got flagged up as, should it be eerie? Did you just misspell that? Like, no. This is a word. Look it up. It's Scrabble Dictionary will tell you. It's also a real word. It's something that I find incredibly useful for concepts that English doesn't necessarily have in such a concise way or such a multi-leveled way. There are Scottish words that I grew up having that I didn't necessarily have the English word for, like skelf, which is a splinter, which I didn't know until much later. And I just think that's part of who I am, and it's important to bring that quality to it, because if you just have uniformity, for one, there's no such thing as a pure standard English. And another, why should there be? I think I taught English as a second language, and it still bothers me that people thought that there was a standard, that we had a textbook and that was how you had to speak. That's just nonsense. And that borderline between Scottish Standard English and Scots is quite broad church, and I think falls somewhere in there with my words, and I just want to bring them out. I want to use them where they're necessary and colour in the text, where English I wouldn't have the same brightness or same stoniness. The Scottish word is right. And sometimes makes it hard, because I've had short stories rejected because people say you can't spell because I'm putting Scottish words in there. Yeah. It can be tough, but it's tough for anyone who's using either dialect or languages that are not English.
My house is getting quite dark. I have to turn a light on, but let's see.
You want to slowly disappear?
It's just darkness. Let's see. So we have a question from Elizabeth Smith. I love the way that the chapters and overlapping narrators create spaces for the reader to fill. How easy was it to create this overall structure for the book without revealing too much or too little?
Yeah, that was tricky. My main concern was boring people. I didn't want to overlap too much where people felt like they were looking at the same thing again. And that was always in my mind, like I have to make a perspective or an insight that is justifying the reuse of this idea, because I didn't want to bore people. I did want to feel, as the Daily Mail described it, rangy. I did actually want it to be kind of like a rambly in parts, to take people on a journey that isn't necessarily quick fire A to B. But yeah, so that structure lends itself to that. it wasn't really an issue to make it like different, or what was I going to say? I got distracted by the darkness in my house. But yeah, I think hopefully I've achieved that structure without compromising on content. So hopefully that's clear enough.
Yeah. Yeah, so we've got a couple more minutes, and we're not going to end it at 8 precisely, because there's a couple more interesting questions. Rebecca Wojcicka wants to know, and of course you would ask this question, what contemporary writers of Gothic and horror do you recommend?
Ooh.
I'm trying to think of mine as well. Carmen Machado would be one of my favorites, obviously.
I really like Susanna Clarke. Piranesi was just fabulous from last year. And it's just, would it count that as Gothic? It's one of those ones that, again, genre is tough to label it. I like that kind of, that aspect. It's got the uncanny aspect of sculptures and statues everywhere and unending corridors and kind of 19th century vibes in certain aspects. And I just really love that. I also really liked, and hopefully you'll like this too, Eris, The Terror. I forget the author of it.
Oh, yeah, Dan Simmons.
So it's this epic story of the Terror and the Erebus, the boats that went looking for the Northwest Passage, and failed miserably.
Totally failed to find it.
And it's kind of the exercise in hubris and also malevolence of nature, but really just hubris and stupidity and misfortune. And it's huge. And more than the book, perhaps I'd recommend the TV series.
Yeah.
Which is absolutely fantastic and just dripping in atmosphere and claustrophobic.
And I think the TV series almost has better atmosphere, I think, in terms of like sheer terror.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it just doesn't let you go. Something about the music and the visuals that are just, at some point it's deeply unsettling. Like there's a moment where someone has to go under the hull of the ship to kind of I think
that's in like episode 1 or something, I think, and it was like
to just fix the rudder or something.
There's just a whole sense of like cascading failure throughout the entire book / series. It's so good.
Yes. So dark, but so wonderful. Yeah.
I think we should. Do you want to collaborate on a pick a list of Gothic and horror works of fiction together? I think we should do that. We can post it on the Lighthouse blog.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do that.
Cool. I'll text you about that. Do you want to talk about the horse mermaid thing? Where did that come from?
There's this toy. I think you remember Beanie Babies?
Yes. I was just talking about Beanie Babies with someone. Why is this coming back?
Oh, it's the retro thing. Maybe they're now worth a lot of money.
That's never going to happen. It was never going to happen.
Not worth anything. But there's a modern generation of them. I think it's the same company. And they are hideous. So they have these big
eyes. Oh my God. Yeah. They're like horror. I thought it reminded me of something. Yeah. They're like horrible with these like dopey eyes and like.
There's like something like weirdly glowing in their eyes. Like there's everything about them is hideous. And and just the fact that they're marketed to kids and the aesthetic just really offends me. So I was thinking of those things. And I was thinking of the ways in which marketing tries to capture our limited attention spans. And I was like, what's the most horrible thing that they could make that's like realistic? And it was a combination of, Beanie Baby and Wi-Fi enabled listening device.
It's really horrible. Yeah. Lock up those Beanie Babies. I don't know what we did with mine back in the day.
They're normal looking though. They were cute. They were cute. Normal Beanie Babies.
They used to be quite cute, and now they're like So I think we've talked a little bit about, like, the last question was writing the story from 3 different points of view difficult? I think we've delved into it, but if you have anything else you want to say about that. That's from Avery Watson.
Oh, there's this thing that I find interesting, the controversy between writing in first person versus writing in third person.
Mm.
And I feel like I got a comment on Flesh of the Peach from some reviewer that was like, this should be in first person because it's so close third that it doesn't make sense as third person. I was like, okay. And I have this sense like maybe they thought I couldn't do it. So I saw it as a challenge to write in first person because I hardly ever did. And now I've done it a lot more. And now I've got a whole book of first person narrations. And it's kind of, I don't know if it's seen as a lesser and who would see it as lesser. It seems like there are people out there who think that first person is kind of.
It's the maybe part of the stigma against young adult fiction, which is often written in a very immediate first person.
Yeah, and I took that kind of idea that the first person in present tense, and I put it in the beginning just as a kind of like, I'm just doing it. I'm just,
it's like, whoa. The
rules. Present tense. Then I'd go to past tense because I'm more comfortable in that one because I'm old.
I think what my final thing that I'm going to say before we wrap up is I have a note here to ask you about the punch recipe.
Oh, well.
And
I've never actually made it. There was a liqueur that I read about that goes milky when you add things to
like,
it.
Eric or pastis or
yeah,
Pernod. No, I have a bottle just there, Pernod.
Oh,
yeah.
So that's definitely in it, and I think there is a touch of rum. It's basically anything you can add to it that would go cloudy. I can't make it. I feel like if you put me in a kitchen with a range of alcohols, I would instinctively know which ones go in it. So I had such a clear idea of what's in Blithe Spirit.
Oh, I have to make an announcement also. I forgot to say, Helen will be signing book plates.
Mm-hmm.
You can email Lighthouse with the, what do you call it? The dedication that you want inside your book. Or if you just want a signature, that's all right too. But if you want a signed and dedicated book, you have 24 hours to email Lighthouse and find out, and then we'll arrange for your book plate to be dedicated. So
I'll try my best handwriting for it.
Yeah, sorry, I totally interrupted because I had forgotten, but I think everyone is still here pretty much. There's 54 people still on the line. Thank you for sticking with us, you guys.
I think the recipe for Blithe Spirit is something that we could discuss and then also post perhaps above the recommendations for Gothic fiction.
Yes, let's do that. I have not done any mixology in a long time.
No, I think I just make terrible studenty drinks that are like pink or that greyish color where you just mix all the alcohols that you have in your cupboard together.
This came out like looking like dishwater.
But we can try.
Yeah. I've been doing a lot of good things with like grapefruit juice lately, but that's my only tip. So
I feel like there's pineapple in Blithe Spirit. I need to just get in the kitchen and properly try things.
Yeah, and it's gonna have kind of a weird footy taste.
It does. There's probably some very specific spirit that has that element to it, and then it all falls apart if you leave it too long.
Right. I think we should probably end it there. But thank you so much, Helen. And like, well done. This is such an amazing book. I can't wait to see where it goes. Like, I'm thinking awards, what's going to happen. Can't wait to see. And thank you.
Happy it just exists.
Yeah. I mean, it's just such a lot of work.
Yeah, and also I get to think this will outlive me. This physical book will be in the world longer than me, potentially, unless I drop it in the bath or something.
Wow.
Why would I read reading it?
Myri and Lighthouse as well. Trying not to drop my copy of the book into the bath. But yeah, Mari, thank you for putting up with all of my scattered emails and for doing tech.
Thank you,
And
Mary.
thank you to the audience. Thank you so much for like sticking around and listening to us blather on. And I really hope you all enjoy the book. And I know a lot of you already have. So yeah, Bitterhall, thank you so much. Should we end the